What if death wasn't the end of your story, but the beginning of a nightmare far worse than anything you could imagine? What if, in your final moments, you found yourself trapped in a place that was never meant for you? Meet Sajid Ahmed, a man who thought he understood life, until he was forced to confront death and the horrors that followed. Sajid Ahmed was a man of reason, a 32-year-old lawyer from Birmingham, England. He didn't have time for ghosts, spirits, or supernatural beliefs. Life was simple. Work hard, pay your bills, and stay grounded in reality. Death to him was just the end of it all. No afterlife, no second chances. But one rainy Thursday evening, Sajid's entire worldview came crashing down. It was rush hour, and he was driving home from a long day in the office. His mind was preoccupied with the cases piling up on his desk, his phone buzzing with missed calls. The weather was miserable, and the traffic was unbearable. Sajid wasn't paying close enough attention when the car in front of him suddenly slammed on its brakes. He tried to react, but it was too late. The screech of tires, the impact. His body jerked violently, and then everything went black. For a long moment there was nothing. No pain, no sound. Just an eerie, suffocating silence. When Sajid opened his eyes, he wasn't in his car. He wasn't in a hospital either. He was standing in the middle of an endless, fog-shrouded street, under a sky that didn't seem to exist. There were no stars, no moon, just an oppressive, unyielding grayness. The air felt heavy, thick with something he couldn't quite place. He took a cautious step forward, but the ground felt strange beneath him, soft, like wet sand, but it didn't make sense. It was as though his feet weren't really touching anything. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind, chilling and disembodied. "You're not supposed to be here, Sajid." His heart raced, but there was no escape. He spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but saw nothing. Just the gray fog swallowing everything in sight. "Who is this? What is this place?" Sajid demanded, his voice shaky but defiant. He didn't believe in this. He couldn't. The voice responded again, low and cold. "This is the threshold. You're in between. A place where the living shouldn't be." Panic surged through him. He knew he had to leave, but he felt rooted to the spot, trapped in this empty limbo. It felt wrong. Every fiber of his being screamed that something was terribly off. Then, from the mist, figures began to emerge, slowly, as though they were materializing from the very fog itself. First, a man, his face hidden beneath a hood, his features obscured by darkness. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural, disturbing light. "You shouldn't be here, Sajid," the figure repeated. His voice was hollow, a whisper that scraped at the edges of reality. Sajid took a step back. "What are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, it stepped aside to reveal a large, twisted gate made of black iron. The gate stood alone, as if it didn't belong. Behind it was something worse, a long, winding road that led into an even darker place, a cavernous abyss where screams seemed to echo faintly, like they were coming from far, far away. A surge of fear gripped Sajid's chest. "No, I don't belong here. I'm not dead. This isn't real." The figure reached out, its fingers long and skeletal, brushing the edge of Sajid's cheek with a touch colder than ice. "You are dead, Sajid, and you've been chosen." Before Sajid could react, the ground beneath him began to shake violently. The mist swirled, twisting into strange shapes, and the distant sounds of wailing intensified. The road behind the gate seemed to shift, the abyss growing larger, and the air itself grew dense and suffocating. "Chosen for what?" Sajid gasped. He could barely breathe, but there was no answer from the figure. Instead, the gate creaked open. The darkness beyond seemed to call out to him, an irresistible pull. His body moved without his will, stepping forward toward the gate. He tried to resist, but it felt like an invisible force was pushing him closer, inch by inch. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. He was no longer standing in the mist. He was falling, plummeting, through a void so black it swallowed all light. The feeling of weightlessness overtook him as if he were falling into an endless chasm. "No!" he screamed, his voice lost in the endless dark. "I won't go." But there was no stopping it. The darkness consumed him. When he finally stopped falling, the first thing he noticed was the heat. It was unbearable, oppressive, like being trapped in the heart of a fire. He opened his eyes to see a twisted, desolate landscape. Rivers of molten lava stretched out beneath a sky that seemed to crack and split like broken glass. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground was scorched black. This wasn't just any afterlife, it was a nightmare. Figures in the distance moved, but they were no longer human. Their faces were contorted with terror, their bodies twisted into grotesque shapes. Some of them screamed, others whispered in strange, guttural languages, but all of them seemed trapped, unable to escape the horrific world they were stuck in. And Sajid realized he was among them. He had crossed over, but not to peace or salvation. He had entered a place far worse than anything he could have imagined. Sajid, you are one of the chosen. The voice echoed again, but this time it came from everywhere. This is not a place for souls of the living. This is where the lost remain, where the guilty are punished. You will never leave. Sajid's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no escape. No way out. The ground beneath him began to tremble, and the heat of the molten rivers burned closer, threatening to consume him. The question lingered in Sajid's mind, even after everything went dark once more. Had he really died? Or had he been sent to a place far worse than death, where the very essence of his soul would burn for eternity? And if death wasn't the end, what did it really mean? Was this his punishment? Or had he crossed into a realm where horrors beyond human comprehension awaited those who weren't meant to know? One thing was certain. Sajid had learned the hard way that death was only the beginning of something much worse.